had been a golden afternoon, and I remember having the familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer.
Thinking about the process of shooting 35 millimeter, but also developing your film and printing it, like in the dark room, making things, working with your hands. And I kept, one of the guys said the biggest thing I missed when digital photography took over was that community that we had in the dark room and just like being there. And I think about when I was watching that, I'm like, the thing that excites me most and the community part is one, but it's that I don't have a computer nearby. I don't need a phone. Like the work is chemicals and it's a negative and it's an enlarger and it's photo paper and it's a red light and it's not that stuff, which is what I've really enjoyed about going out to try to make work is, I have my phone with me and all that in the truck, but like go on these photo walks for my photography channel and I'm out there for 2-3 hours and I don't check any of that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm alone, which isn't, which sometimes I want, but yeah, there's something about like, and I know cameras are obviously technology and, I use my truck to get around and whatnot, but there's just continuing pull towards getting away from my desk.
I think there's this idea. I literally wrote this down while you were saying that: rejection as a process of integration.
Yeah, addition by subtraction.
Yeah, I think we're at that stage with technology in our lives right now, as a society.
Yeah, man, it is really ramped up for me in a major way.
Well, I feel this clarity, like, I've really, like, this, you've seen this, and like I've seen this, like. I've really kind of just been floating around for like the last year and a half of my life of not knowing, I have stuff to say,
yeah,
but I don't quite know what. And over the last, call it 4 months, I feel like I'm just really singling in on something special for me that I have something clear that I want to, almost tell myself and like investigate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's starting to become very clear. Like it was always, kind of clear. And it also, like, it started with this idea of, I started on this idea of like doing projects about Nashville and like, oh, this means a lot. I wanted to kind of, investigate kind of the change. And then that led down this rabbit hole of like, look at how much this has changed. What has caused that change? Which led down this huge rabbit hole with like, reading, just consuming all of this. You get into the century of the self stuff that came as a direct byproduct of that. You get a lot of like the Chomsky talking about like the propaganda machines and things like that, and just all of these ideas kind of converging and relating. In the background of that, I'm like watching all these Werner Herzog films and like exploring this idea of like the ecstatic truth. Like, what is the a truth that might not necessarily be true, but it is a truth. Like, how do you represent that through a metaphor?
Yeah.
And it's all kind of coming into view, right? And then, you have these feelings and you don't know how to quite put them into words, and they just sit in the back of your mind, and then they're starting to turn into words or just turn into visuals. I'm starting to like see things and okay, this needs to be captured and explored more. So it's interesting, but I your idea there of getting away and like, you just like, yes, the camera's technology, but you're changing all of these ideas came together for me because of the rejection as a process of integration. Like, take steps back to take a step forward. Like, I was barreling in this direction of, felt like I had something to say, and part of that was using analog photography, but I had to almost take a few steps back to move. And I think it's happening culturally.
I do want to say when you talked about you sort of like floating and I don't know if this is the right word, but sort of like holding back on maybe making stuff or making work like in a a very focused way
publicly for what, almost a year and a half now.
So so for those of you that have been listening or watching the podcast for how long?
By the way,
this is getting close to
a year.
Yeah.
This would be our 40th week.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. Alex and I don't have a lot of conflict. We don't no, I think this and I don't think that's quite right. We don't have, so there's probably a general sense of us having a lot of similarities, right? General point of view, general perspective. Obviously there's all the minute nuances and differences and whatnot. But what I find fascinating, and I made this reference, I think, in the last episode about baseball writers, you kind of holding back and kind of figuring it out and what your focus is going to be or how it's going to come out is the complete opposite of how I do it.
Yeah.
And have done it. I'm like the baseball writer. It's like consume
Iteration.
it, feel it, see it, experience it, write something, make a video, take photos, put a zine together, I just just churning through it. And I'm not saying that that's better or worse. There's no qualitative judgment
process,
of it.
yeah.
But that's what I feel such a pull to do. It's just ingest it and then process it, make something as a result, and then go on. And we'll see if that evolves over time. I'm also in a very heightened place of excitement and inspiration and exploring new things and whatnot. So I love that you are, from what I can tell, going about your experience in a completely opposite way from me, especially for about the last year. This being, from what I've seen, one of the main outlets for whatever you've taken in and then put back out.
Yeah. It's probably more obvious. Like I don't go back and watch. I haven't listened to any old episodes.
Yeah.
We kind of edit them, and once that,
right.
It's my experience has been once they're out, they're out.
Yeah.
But I would be curious is like, how clearly does that track? We have been sitting down pretty regularly and recording.
Yeah.
Lots happened. I would wonder how that evolution of ideas tracks.
Yeah. And I think for you, and we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, I think you feel very deliberate and aware of when you're going to make something, it's going to be work. Whereas I am occupying, so much in the content side of things.
Yeah.
Versus like something that is just work.
Then again, it's like you would say that, but I guess in a way my job is like creating
that's
content.
True.
In a way.
Yes.
So that's still happening.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm just fishing.
Right. And I certainly don't want to give the implication that you're stuck in neutral.
I would love to go in neutral, right? But it's not an option for either of us. You're just more publicly, like I'm doing everything through an entity, right?
Yeah, you have sort of an umbrella over you for the contribution you make to the content that.
And it's like, that's very much baseball writing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you could honestly, the argument could be made that what you're doing is a lot more significant than the baseball writing that I'm doing.
Yeah.
I think it's just, with me, there is that clear personal, professional.
Yeah.
There's a curtain there.
Right. Yeah. And for me, it
doesn't quite exist for you just because of how you've, you are the.
Right.
Yeah. The product. In a way.
And that I think has its own sort of ramifications that, I don't know how often you're sort of like grappling or contending with, does that curtain, help create that binary, that dichotomy that just sort of makes it clear.
I think I love it in a way, like, how much I get frustrated with some things about, just the politics and industry and things like that. But I sometimes I'll explain it to people as like a Stockholm syndrome. Right.
Yeah.
But I think there is, the most important thing to me has been, one, it's the relationships. Like I'm very much a person that values personal relationships, but not, face to face, I guess is just how that expresses itself.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm very one track minded, sometimes to a fault.
Right.
Like I think you've probably recognized this over the past, half a decade. Like whatever I'm
Yes.
doing is the thing that I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like there's
Intense.
it is an intensity, but it's, I mean, that's also just like, I can't not do that.
Right.
Some people are there's a skill there.
Yeah.
Where they can just like do multiple things.
Right.
But like if I'm having a conversation with you,
Yeah.
and then I switch to have to do something else, I'm like,
Yeah. Right.
completely. Yeah. So, but I do think I'm very attracted to that idea of having that curtain.
Yeah.
And it's like, it might not be ideal and there might be a lot of BS, but the most important thing to me, other than the personal connections, is it's like creating work.
Yeah.
And, executing a craft. And maybe I don't feel like I get to do that as much as I'd like, or at least to the form that I'd like. But there, the opportunity to be able to still create work and have it undercover, have a curtain there, is very attractive to me. And I think that might outweigh a lot of the negatives,
right,
and lead to that Stockholm syndrome feeling at times. So we kind of just jumped in mid-flow. I'm almost thinking maybe we go back, give a little context, it seems like, I think for this episode, we focus on two things, and that's the article. And I'll let you give context on that, because we read that and it just really put into words what we've been feeling.
And also just created a greater awareness of, I think, something that you suspect is out there and that you're seeing, but you just haven't.
We've talked about several times. So we'll talk about that. And then, I came in kind of hot with this. I'm reading a book right now, and I recommend, I think I recommend people go check this out.
Yeah.
I found it a couple of months ago. I started about a month ago, and it's really been one that I've just kind of slowly gone through. Like, I'll read a few pages, chew on it for a little bit. It's not the most dense book, but there are a lot of really interesting ideas in there that I think are worth just closing your eyes and thinking about for a couple of days. And the book is called Technopoly, and it's by a I guess he's a culture critic, would be the but he probably didn't categorize himself as that. Maybe he did. Popped up in an interview. I ended up watching like an hour interview with him, and I was like, okay, I need to read this guy's book. And the book is called Technopoly, and it's essentially talking about how we have prioritized as a culture, and this was written in 1991, I believe. Yeah. So 33 years old.
Right. Which is crazy.
And, going back, a lot of people look at it as like pretty prescient of where we are today. And then also, the changes he kind of got the core right. So it looks like it's just gotten worse. Yeah. Which, maybe that, good on him for having a holistic understanding of this thing, but there's plenty of critiques you can give. And, I kind of talked you through I needed a way to summarize it. And I was like, what's the best way to summarize this for Matt without just spending 2 hours talking? So I had a conversation with an LLM that I use, and it was essentially just asking a couple of questions, trying to tie some different things in. Yeah. And
that was very helpful.
Yeah. And I thought it was
to the quick.
Great use of technology right there, right?
Very elegant Cliff's Notes.
Yeah, very elegant Cliff Notes.
Cliff Notes.
I mean, not my writing was not elegant in there. The questions were completely just blah, 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 but probably a lot.
But she sorted through it nicely.
Yeah.
The LLM did.
Yeah. Great job. But essentially he talks about how culture has been captured by technology, and like technology is the lens we view everything through. Medicine, culture as a whole, art,
product release cycle. In my world, obviously technology is a big.
And, me and you have talked about commerce and the algorithm, and all of that is a byproduct of technology, right? It's binary, it's numbers, it's revenue, it's it's statistics, polling. All of this that's technology. It's it's a result of technology, or a form of technology.
Learning. The language learning model you use to summarize Technopoly.
Trust me, the irony does not is not lost on me.
And we certainly don't, we're not coming at this like anti-technology necessarily. It's just sort of like, how does this book, and I think once I read it too, create, just like the article did, a greater awareness of what's going on, so that, to me, it goes back to what we talked about, which is mapping. Like, I map people when I talk to them. Like, I try to get an understanding of basic personality traits, things they tend to do, this or that, just so I can navigate them.
You empirical bastard.
Just so I can have a better way to navigate who they are and all that. And I think this, for me...
You're downloading them?
Yeah. For me... a book like this and that articles go, okay, my map is drawn even better. Map being a piece of technology.
Yeah.
My map is even better for understanding, oh, I see, that's what's going on there. Or that's why I'm feeling this way. That's why I immediately live streamed about the Final Cut Pro for iPad update that was released and letting everybody know what's all new and going on in there.
Audrey said something to me the other day that was like interesting. This is not like it was just, she said something about technology.
Dr. Audrey.
Yeah, she's a lot. That's what I was going to,
just a huge change.
Like there's a, the intelligence gap there, yeah. Literal doctor, actual real scientist. And there was some kind of something that referenced, and I was explaining something, and she was like, I don't understand what you're talking about. And I was like, yeah, but like you absolutely could, like, you do understand. And I was like, look, I have a flip phone. Like, I don't know shit about technology. And then she said something like, it was just an offhanded comment. I didn't think too much about it at the time. And then it like circled back. And she was like, yeah, but you understand technology. You understand how technology works, and you choose not to use it.
Exactly.
And I didn't think about it much because I wasn't thinking in that lens. I was thinking of like, look, you can absolutely understand this. Like, if my dumbass can understand this, and you absolutely can.
Yep.
That was the lens I was like. But then I came back around and I was like, oh, what an elegant way to put it. Which again, just evidence, right? That what an elegant way to state that. The goal should be to understand it on a deep level.
That's right.
And then you can apply it when it's necessary, but that's also knowing when it's not necessary. And I think but getting back to the Technopoly book, he essentially says, the culture is captured by technology. That's our lens we view everything through. We've thrown everything else out. Everything's got to be empirical. We've applied that, yes, to the natural world, trying to understand how gravity works, how the Earth's rotation, all of these things.
And now how consciousness works.
Well, and so then we started to apply it to social sciences, people.
Yep.
And the argument, or one of the arguments, there's a lot of arguments that he makes, and there's a lot of brilliant kind of thinking, or at least just brilliant stuff to chew on, like interesting ways to look at it. And he makes this, ties it in with literature and myth. And, if you've done like any screenwriting or whatever, you've probably read like, or at least, Cliff noted the Joseph Campbell,
right?
And, but if
Hero's Journey, The Power of Myth, link in show notes.
Yeah, link in show notes. And you talked about how that documentary about that kind of changed your perspective.
The Power of Myth.
And I've always looked at it as like, that's kind of what our responsibility is as artists, in a way.
Yeah, is
to find interesting metaphors, challenge pre-existing metaphors, break down human experience into myth.
Yeah.
Not so you don't make art empirically. Art should not be made through data.
Yeah.
Has always been my belief. And it's full of nuance. And so he starts making this argument about how we've tried to apply natural science to social science. And when you do that, you lose all the nuance. And so there's this, that was interesting in the 90s when we were kind of, I think when he wrote this book in probably 89 through 90, right? It probably took him a few years. There was this idea that we were going to reach a point. It almost seemed as if we were going to reach a point where technology was going to be the solution for everything. The answers lie in the data.
Yeah.
And I can see how that would have been something easy to buy into at that time. It was the computer revolution. We were just getting into the internet, was kind of right on the periphery. And you start to think of like, for one, props to him for stepping back and being like, hold on, pump the brakes. Obviously it didn't happen. And I think he even recognizes there's some writing in there where he kind of sees like, look, I might be the old guy yelling at the cloud.
Right.
Like, or, you're standing in a rainstorm and you're telling it to stop, and it's like, it's going to rain. You're like, it's going to happen no matter what.
Yeah.
Almost a force of nature. And I think though that it's just continued to spiral and get, there's more and more information. And so we had this idea that there was an empirical truth. Like there is a truth to the world that can be expressed in an equation or in data. It's out there. And now you hear this term thrown around a little bit, and it's like post-truth. We're entering post-truth or whatever that is. And there's so much data, there's no way to process it. You can have an event and it can only be processed subjectively. There is no truth. And he kind of says like subjectivity is the enemy of technopoly or empirical, right?
Yes.
Subjectivity, because it's seeking an objective. And it's like, so what happens when you enter a world where objective doesn't exist? And we're already like, there's 2 stories, 3 stories, 10 stories to everything that happens. There's, what point of view? It reminds me of the Kurosawa film, right? And you're just like, who's telling the truth?
Right. There's 2 sides to every
great
story.
example of art, presenting nuance and metaphor. But you have the, kind of breakdown. And when we adopted technology or Technopoly, and we kind of went head on, the argument that he makes is that we kind of threw out all of our myth, philosophy, we threw out all of that because that stuff can't be proven. And this is the new world. Things need to be backed with evidence. So we threw all that out. And now it's more important than ever. And we've lost how to create that, right? You look at art that's being created nowadays. A lot of art is empirical, I would argue, at least a lot of like the popular art.
Yeah.
So how do we, what is I asked this in the thing, but like, what is the responsibility of the artist? How do we balance that? Because it seems to me that we're entering a point where, the myth and the philosophy and the understanding of the world through narrative, and he used like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky as reference examples of like, they do a better job than a lot of social scientists do. Social scientists are just kind of picking up on their theories and being like, oh, but look, data. And look at this new thing that I discovered. And it's like, well, they were saying that in a more nuanced way, if anything, more effectively. And so it's like, you're just repackaging it and presenting it as new information to fit the, Technopoly or the technological viewpoint. So I think it's interesting though, like what is our responsibility as artists? Because serving that idea of, if we're entering post-truth, what becomes important is how do we hold ourselves up? What is the structure that we hold ourselves on? And a lot of that is understanding humans or humanity through myth and through these long-standing metaphors that might not be exact and objective, but so that's a long, I kind of lost the train of thought in there of like where I started, but I was just trying to lay out kind of the argument that he's making. And you and I talked about this in pre-show. So this is like the second time you've kind of heard this nonsense spiel. And I just read this passage last night, so I haven't even had a ton of time to process it. I'm just tying it in with a lot of other things that were kind of floating around in my world. So talked about the David Foster Wallace concept of new sincerity and E Unimus Plurum, that essay that he wrote in
which I need to read.
This like postmodern society, post-irony. I think that ties in as well. Still processing on kind of what I think about this. But yeah, I mean, what in your mind, what is the responsibility of the artist? What is the influence of technology? Like, I want to hear your thoughts on everything.
It's hard because, I think about the responsibility of the artist. It makes me feel like, the artist has to be like consciously, whether it's pushing back or offering a counterpoint, making things that are counter to things moving toward the death of myth and, moving towards technology, data, empirical evidence, all of that stuff, and objectivity, and away from subjectivity, you're going to have artists that just react to this stuff naturally. It just happens. Counterculture, the grunge movement, Madonna, they take in what the world is giving them and they react to it. And they may not be going, well, I feel like after reading this gentleman's book called Technopoly, and it was my responsibility to create art that was, flew in the face of that. I don't know that that all artists do that. Now, I definitely think there are a lot of artists that take in something and make art as a direct response to it.
Right.
100%.
We've definitely talked about, and holding two ideas in your head at one time.
Yeah.
I'm still processing this, but I also want to reiterate, because some people might have listened to earlier episodes. Well, didn't you argue in earlier episodes that the artist's responsibility is to be objective? Mm-hmm. And I also think that's true, right? So that kind of would almost on the surface seems like it goes against this idea. But I think when I say the artist's responsibility is to be objective, it's the artist's responsibility is not to portray a message.
It's to take a subjective experience and transform it into something that's laid out objectively, right? That the person who takes in what they made is not being told how to feel, not being told what to think.
Absolutely. Well put.
Yeah. It's not didactic. It's not binary. It's not right or wrong. It's, I had this experience. I channeled it into this through my unique perspective and created this, and then take from it what you will. But I do think that even in 1992, which is amazing, in reading the LLM and your conversation with it, how you're reading something that is an exact description of everything I've been thinking and feeling, whether it's knowingly or unknowingly, my struggles with technology, and then, certainly what mass media or even independent media puts out there about humanity as a whole and how we're handling technology. I look at something like that, and I haven't read Technopoly. I'm kind of with you, audience. Alex is presenting this, and I'm catching up, and I would have to read the book and get a lot more aware of what those concepts are in that book. But just in general terms, seeing something like that, he's calling out what, where he sees things going and the potential negatives that arise from it. Yeah, so this is one of those episodes where you're processing it in real time.
This is a process episode for sure.
And for me, I always want, again, going back to the map analogy, I always want to consume stuff like this without this sort of just a little bit more at face value, a little bit more objectively. I don't want to go into something like Technopoly and then just be destroyed by it, like that article messed me up, and we'll get into that in a second. But I just want to try to have greater awareness. I want to see things a little bit better, but then at the same time, I don't want to always feel like I'm seeing things clearly. Yeah. I want to be enlightened. I want to be illuminated.
But
yeah, and watching that Joseph Campbell Power of Myth series, I was like, I've felt these things. I have had inclinations toward these thoughts or these feelings, and this made me aware of things that I was only aware of on a very just a general feeling. I know I'm very rambly and not like making any clear points here, so forgive me. But
I think,
I want then that better framework, that improved framework, that more detailed map to infiltrate the things that I want to make. And an article like the one we read, The Age of Average, which we'll link in the show notes, an article like that does trigger in me, as someone who aspires to make work, a desire to respond to it in some way. Like, one of my initial reactions was, I want to go around Omaha now. And I've sort of generally been aware that all these new apartment buildings all look the same, but like, I actually now want to go out and photograph them, even if it's not to, put it out there as work, but just to go, oh yeah.
Well, you're testing it with it.
Yeah.
Like, you're testing the theory. One of the interesting things is it's a bit, for any social scientists that are listening, like he calls that field out pretty tough. And basically says,
in the article or the book?
In the book.
In the book. Okay.
Essentially says, it's pretty unnecessary. It's just translation of things that were known previously into this new kind of stilted Technopoly language that we're like this, condensed metaphor that we've built our world around now. Mm-hmm. You're taking all of this nuance out and you're just putting it into like a black and white piece of, data. And that's kind of what he says. And look, I'm not here to argue about the field of the social sciences, but I did read that and it almost confirmed something that I've always thought. And I got into this a little bit at the beginning, but like, I think, if you are approaching work, especially if your subject is other humans, you should approach it with the same rigor that, and not intellect, but the same, like a Carl Jung would, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's work that has been done in like the field of social science or in psychology, and that is highly academic. It's like but you should be going for the same realizations. And I think kind of what you just laid out sounds a lot like a scientific process. We've talked about that before, where work is just laying, like the true purpose of creating work is to test these ideas within yourself. And hopefully, I have
a hypothesis and I'm going to run an experiment.
And, I know there is definitely irony in me presenting it like that, because that's the lens of technology.
Yeah.
I'm trying to pull art into a, but, there is a responsibility, but, because I guess what I'm trying to say is great work shares all of the characteristics of great, science. There's something more to it, though, that can only be accomplished through art.
Yeah.
Like, there is the nuance. There is the not, everything is not so precise. It doesn't have to be so precise. And I think we should carry that into our making when we're trying to create things, when we're trying to explore ideas. It should be approached from completely just universe juju, like going at this as just pulling ideas out, working, and just, flowing through ideas.
Yep.
But then there should also be the other side where it's like, I'm exploring something. I'm trying to. And,
much more deliberate and focused.
And knowing what's already been done is an important aspect to that.
Yeah.
Whether that's reading great literature, watching great film, or familiarizing yourself with, psychology and social science. It's all in the same vein.
I think we are due for something big. This sounds like, the big debut of this cool new form of music, or this new, whatever. But I feel like something's going to...
As a society?
Yeah, just something that this... what was outlined in Technopoly and sort of like the state of how things are in the world, I think when you have enough people that are feeling something and then reacting to it, especially through making work. You know, and not that I'm gonna obviously like be the person that maybe does this or whatever, because I'm late to the game. But when it comes to analog tech, retro tech, photography, poetry, whatever I make as a response to what I'm feeling and what I'm experiencing and what the temperature is in the room, what the climate is out there, I feel like just as a whole, something's gonna pop here.
We talked about,
I don't know what it'll be.
We talked about how it's already infiltrating like zeitgeist.
Yeah.
And it's not, maybe it's not clear that this, and you know, maybe we're just projecting because this is what we're thinking about. So everything, this is our lens. We're just seeing all these events, but it does seem like there is a big unraveling happening between like this empirically driven, you know, pulled out like
committee,
decision by committee world that we've created,
designed by focus group,
and maybe wishful thinking is also a component of our saying that. But it does seem like, you know, culturally there have been some things that are happening and have happened recently that point towards just a new wave of thinking.
Yeah. Something
Maybe.
that just feels like it came from outer space, and yeah, you know, all the signs were there that it was coming, but you know, you couldn't have,
and
there was no data set that could have predicted
it. You know,
it.
we probably sound like a couple of nut jobs on a podcast. And
Yeah.
go, it's coming from, but no, it does feel like there is, I mean, it's interesting. The book was written 33 years ago. Technopoly book was written 33 years ago, and it's how technology is kind of captured culture. And we really haven't, it's things are different. Things are very different, but things aren't like drastically different. There haven't been like, you know, there hasn't been anything like completely revolutionary that's happened. There have been little things.
I would argue that, you know, a full-blown computer in your pocket, that to me, if I had to make an argument for a revolutionary change,
well, the internet has come into, like, the internet is probably the most revolutionary thing that's happened.
Right.
But even like, the internet
the
happened.
age of information.
Like the internet was already brewing in 91. Like it was already, it hadn't really it hadn't gone mainstream yet. Yeah. But it was already brewing when he wrote this book. Like there were people that were sending emails and
I think too, just overall
what I guess just really quick to in that point, like he, you know, you couldn't have seen what was coming with the internet, but even that kind of got co-opted in a lot of ways.
Yeah, sure.
Like, you know, the internet was supposed to be this, you think about early tech or what the internet was supposed to be, like it was supposed to be like this open source thing that kind of went out, and, you know, civil liberties were just built in, they were ingrained in the internet. You had, you know, it was going to open up all of these, tear down all these gatekeepers, all of these new highways to get information, and you know, then you had like, you know, Web 2 came around, and suddenly it's not just, oh, I'm going and I'm pulling information from the internet. It was publishing and pulling, and it was supposed to upend everything, and then it kind of got captured. Yeah. And, you know, part of the revolution that I think is coming in the field of technology is like, yes, I think we're going to get to a point where, you know, call it Web 3, call it whatever, we're starting to, you know, kind of leave some of those gatekeepers behind, some of those people that have captured what the internet was supposed to be. But I mean, culture, like, what does that look like culturally outside of technology?
Yeah.
These are the best episodes for me because I have, and I don't know the answers to these questions, obviously.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, when I feel like I'm a little bit lost, not lost, but sort of quiet in these moments, I try to just talk about what I'm thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
And so, thoughts I had while you were saying that was, I think sometimes we want to like tie technological revolution to a single thing, the internet, the smartphone. I also think about just
The car.
Yeah, I think about just overall this explosion of technology that democratized a lot of the things that only previously a few people could do. Things that I can do, like make a video and put it on YouTube, live stream. Like I literally live stream for an hour and a half after this news of Final Cut Pro and Final Cut Pro for the iPad after Apple's event, talking about what the implications were of those updates, et cetera, et cetera. Admittedly, like sort of part of the machinery of that world in my excitement over a piece of technology that I feel empowers me to express myself and, share the tools that I use with other people, et cetera, et cetera. So I think about that, just the access we all have, the reduction of gatekeepers for the average person to connect with people, build an audience, but then also succumb to the attract and extract paradigm that I'm currently really grappling with, and I think responding to in the things that I'm interested in, the work that I'm doing, et cetera. So that's one big thought. The other thought is, how will this generation who grew up with, who is a 21st century generation, maybe some of them learned how to walk, in the late 90s, but they were growing as people in the 21st century. So there isn't, like me, the pre-internet days, that those sort of, they've always had devices. They've always had this like very heightened state of technology, both culturally and the actual stuff that was in their lives. iPads, iPhones, TVs, where stuff is on demand. They can make stuff, upload stuff, post this, whatever. How will those people find ways to do stuff outside of the matrix, to do something in the real world, to, I don't know, is the reaction to some of that technology to get away from the life online?
Is the revolution just like micro communities?
Right. You saw that, that's sort of stereotypical, and it's my only understanding of it is as it's been represented in, television shows and movies, but, these sort of cult enclaves and religious enclaves or spiritual enclaves, in the 60s counterculture and all that. Are we going to see stuff like that?
I think it might be a good thing to start to, tear down. One of the things that he talks about in Technopoly is like how we tear down icons, and how when we went into technology so much, like that became the only holy grail. That became the only sacred icon. Yeah. So suddenly you start using Jesus to sell wine, was his example, right? The commercial where Jesus is holding a bottle of wine. That's right. He's like, when I turn water into wine, this is what I was picturing. Yeah. And then go to buy this wine here. No, nothing is sacred anymore. Yeah. Other than, technology, which is, technology is it is God.
It's the deification of technology.
Yeah. And so, I mean, is it almost the first thought I had, you said like the cult communities. Let's, maybe we start tearing down the iconography or the reference behind the word cult. Right. Because I think cult is there's
a positive light for it. And there's what some of our culture has made it a bad word, Heaven's Gate, Branch Davidians, all that stuff that you immediately think of, the word cult as having a very negative connotation.
That's a great project.
Yeah.
Exploring cult.
Yeah.
Humanizing cult. Tearing down the pre-existing. I don't know. I need to drop that thing.
Yeah. Well, and
Leave that
there's arguments that, even with my audience surrounding a piece of software, you could argue that there's sort of a
the
cult aspect of it. Yeah, the cult of Apple, or the cult of a specific application like Final Cut Pro, and devout followers, and all that stuff. You could have people that take that audience that they've attracted, and then the extraction begins, where it's they're more binary in their thinking, they're more absolutist in their thinking, they're more didactic, they're telling people how to think and feel, what they should do, how they should do it. And I think that just from my rudimentary understanding of a cult following, that's where things tend to go a little negative, in my estimation. But then you have things like a cult movie, where we think of that so positively.
There's some great books on. I'll reference, or I'll send you the references.
Yeah.
If I remember to, because I've read some interesting books on just the idea of cults, and everything is essentially a cult in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and then I, take that a step further and go, is that, what is that? That's great. What's it a symptom of? What is, if there feels like there's a prevalence of those things happening, like
is it a symptom of our nature though?
Yeah. Is it, just part of human nature? Is it a reaction to, what we're experiencing culturally, societally, as a civilization? Are the forces of technology, at play, mass media, those types of things, a lack of
tribal identity,
of a substantial presence of an artistic movement or something that has really captured the heart and imagination of people to dive into before the commercial interests go, oh, we can make money here. Let's start processing this, hip hop, grunge, Warhol's pop art movement. Those are the first three that come to mind for me.
Yeah.
And then the imitators that come afterwards, because they see the playbook, and this goes back to the article, The Age of Average. Somebody makes something that really resonates with people, and then the data drives the imitators to distill it down to a reductionist facsimile. And
let's jump into the article. Yeah,
and then just put it out, get it out there.
Maybe if you just want to break down the article, because you sent me this article, somebody sent it to you.
Yeah.
I sent it to 35 people. No,
yeah.
But I mean, it was, it's not necessarily saying anything new or anything quite.
Again, it's
one of those things where it aggregates a lot of things that almost that situation where you want to sit down and explain this to somebody, but you're like, okay, do you have an hour?
Yeah.
And it's just not realistic. Like if it's you and I having a conversation, it's realistic.
Yeah.
But for most people in our lives, it's not realistic that I can be like,
yeah,
can I sit you down for an hour and talk to you about how art has, disintegrated into this,
And art in all aspects in this article, from architecture, the art of architecture, to, how we
fashion, architecture, music.
Yeah, exactly.
Literature
and
film.
A friend of mine sent me this article weeks and weeks ago, and it sort of stagnated in my inbox, and I've been working hard this week to get to inbox 0, the exalted nirvana stage of all technology loving people.
The productivity mecca.
Yeah, that's right. Productivity nirvana across 4 inboxes to get to inbox 0 for me. Anyway, so I processed that article and I said, I haven't read this yet. So I did. And he had, written just sort of his reaction to it.
All of your language is super technical.
Sort of like a droid here, going through everything. And as I read the article, man, it was just, I read a lot of articles and I don't always have a visceral, deep reaction to them, but it really gutted me as the word that I came up with. And I honestly felt after reading it, a little touch of panic setting in. It's the only word I can think of to describe it. And I, of course, had to send it to Alex because I want him to be in a panic state as well.
I'm always in a panic state. You're not doing
Right.
anything to me.
That's my secret. I'm always in a panic state. So I sent it off to you, and I need to read it again just to get those extra layers of nuance and detail. But it basically was a gut punch because it goes through architecture, it goes through fashion, music, etc., and it just kind of gives examples and shows how everything just is the same. And the biggest one that got me was like apartment buildings, and Omaha has got a lot of expansion. These neighborhoods that were a little rougher have been scooped up by young entrepreneurs and business people, small businesses, mom and pop shops making coffee shops and ice cream parlors and all that. And so now the residential stuff's moving in because the corporate interests see demand and they see opportunity. And they, have whatever
They have to ruin it. No.
whatever architecture firms design these buildings, and they could just all look like boring, inexpensive, designed by focus group things, and they're everywhere. And I read that article, and I was, I immediately wanted to go out and photograph them just to sort of like document, like, you're right, like this is actually true. And so it was just really, and then, I start looking back at my body of work as a content creator, a writer, and I'm like, the influence that Peter McKinnon's videos or these YouTubers, and like, oh, you got to do your B-roll like this. And, you're not even thinking about it. You just sort of do it. And like the impact that has. And, and then the questions of, is anything really original, anymore? Is that even possible? Can I make a video?
Like, is anything original, period? But I mean, we are like very, we're a very mimetic society. Like, that's kind of how we approach things. Our species, maybe. And not society, species.
And I think there's originality in the sense that people take ingredients of multiple things that maybe don't seem connected, and then they combine them in a unique and interesting way where you can trace them back to the source, but in that unique combination there is a feeling of originality.
We talked about it before. It's like you take one turn, take another turn, take another turn.
Right.
10 turns later, you're at something
that's right,
almost original.
And so you see that in my work where I'm trying to incorporate, and I'm not the first person that used a typewriter to like do titles, obviously Van Neistat does it, movies have done it before.
All the typewriter channels.
Yeah, all the typewriter channels. You try to like come up with fresh ways to, make your point or to do what you do. I've always felt like my voice and perspective is unique, but I don't always want to deliver it in like the playbook way. Like, oh yeah, you got to do like a little B-roll montage at the beginning, and then you got to have like the lo-fi music, and then you do a little pre-lap with your vocals, and then you go into you sitting in like your studio with like a nice little edge light that's warm, and you got the the daylight balance light, like you just start checking all the like what was done before, just like the apartment buildings do. Okay, so we like the faux brick facade, and we like the metal texture in the middle. We want square windows. We do a little sign. We get that cool branding company to do our brand. You know what I mean? Like you just start going through the machinery of what's worked in the past, and you just keep making it this recipe for, what's like a apple pie, or I don't know, like this recipe for this thing that just sort of like loses its specialness because it's just been distilled down to
it's the same every time.
It's the same everywhere, know.
It's been, it's factory and producing it. It's mass produced. There's
and it just ends up making everything just average.
Yeah. Well, I think there's like it's lost on a lot of people. That's become a way of doing things. I think it's lost on a lot of people that we are just, it sounds so, acid culture to say this, or like hippie, but everything is made up. Everything is, you can do things anyway. Like there might be more optimal like there's not really even optimal. There's optimal based on the variables that you're trying to optimize for.
Yeah.
So you're choosing variables and you're optimizing for them, and then that might be optimal for those variables, but then you're sacrificing other variables. You can look at this through history. There's cultures where there are clear examples. When we were in Rome, and we were going to some of the museums, it just became so clear how much they valued aesthetics.
Yeah.
How much that was the variable they were optimizing for. And everything was just so ornate. And I even made a comment to Audrey, we're like 3 or 4 museums in, or we're walking through ruins or whatever. And I'm just like, I bet all of this was lost on people, because it's just, when everything is ornate, nothing's ornate.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Like I guess what I'm trying to say though is you're optimizing for a certain variable, and your society determines that. And right now, technology is what's determining the variable, I would argue.
Yeah.
And part of that might just be because I'm reading this book right now, and that's like my lens, but
yeah,
I'm aware of that. But, we're optimizing for it. And I think what gets lost is that we can optimize for anything, but there are incentive structures, there's regulation, especially if architecture and things like that. There's, there's regulation that, has popped up that limits what the potential is. But I think, you should approach anything you do with the understanding, like, yes, there's regulation, but don't build from that. Build from like, okay, let's get as creative as possible, and then try to work that in.
Yeah.
I think what gets lost though, like finishing that point, is anything's possible. There's this, I believe his name is Jaron Lanier. He's a technologist. He works for Microsoft. He invented virtual reality.
Yeah.
And he has interviews, and I enjoy watching his interviews. And he has this idea for this principle called data dignity, and it's like where everybody owns their data. Like everybody is the stewards of their data. And then, but one thing he uses in this is talking about gardeners, and just like, you can optimize for this one set of variables and you can make everything look the same, or you could do this, where you you have spirals and just allow them to, like, all of these communities, these micro communities, kind of to just do their own thing and see what blooms out of that, instead of having this, like, everybody needs to optimize for the same things.
Well, and I think that optimization comes from, too, the access to information. So if we were left to our own devices to come up with something, our parents, they always, my mom always did her garden like this. Well, I don't want to do it that way. I don't want those types of plants, but I don't have access to the information that's going to teach me, what plants that are in opposition to her choices can work. Here I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna mix these flowers with these vines. I'm gonna this. Forgive me, people who are gardeners, for not knowing some of the lingo, but
you don't go on Google and then because now
That's
everybody
right.
goes on Google, and they find the first search result.
That's right.
And everybody's going to do that.
And they go, oh, you need height here, you need lower things here. You're supposed to do things, and I learned this in plotting out my front landscaping, like, oh, you do things in like groups of odd numbers. I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah.
But if I didn't have access to that stuff, and went to the landscaping store and didn't talk to an employee to get in pointers from them, I would have had to have like stood there staring at my yard going, what do I like? What sounds good to me?
See,
and
but
I
there
wonder,
used to be at a local level, you go to your landscaping store,
Sure.
and they would have a different perspective. Now they're just going to regurgitate whatever Google would tell you, because that's the consensus.
or they might go, what are the most satisfied customers that we had, and what designs did we deploy? What plants did we have? What ones were pest resistant? What ones didn't attract deer? Which one? Blah blah blah.
It's interesting though, because like we're so entrenched in it at this point. There is the only, maybe this isn't true. This is a bit of hyperbole probably, but just gut reaction at all. Is it like the only solution, the only way out of this is to just start from scratch? Like throw out the internet, start looking at your garden, and just, you start experimenting again.
There's a school of thought, and this has come up in a couple of things that I've consumed, where it's like people that are very learned, very experienced, people that they are actually seeking out, this is the Yoda thing, unlearn what you have learned, but they're actually like trying to seek out that sort of beginner mindset. Like, knowing less is going to help me figure out what this thing is. I was just watching 60 Minutes with my daughter, and it was these two young women at a Black Catholic high school that were like one of the only people who have proven the Pythagorean theorem or something associated with the Pythagorean theorem. They each came up on their own with the proof for it. I think someone in like 2004, forgive me for forgetting, I'll put a link to the video in the show notes, had come up with a proof as well for it. But it was something that had, stumped mathematicians for 2,000 years. So you could throw the world's greatest mathematician that to try to figure out, and it's almost like they know too much to be able to see it more clearly. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And this happens with everything.
This is why a lot of like the biggest breakthroughs in any field pretty much comes from when somebody adopts principles of that. It's not from somebody who has been in that field forever.
Right.
Sometimes it is.
Yeah.
But usually it is like the major breakthroughs are somebody who has come in and just been like built from the ground up.
Yeah.
You call it first principles thinking or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, approaching something and just being like, why is this done this way to the very core?
Well,
building it back up. And
I'll give you an example. I've had fear with film photography, wasting money on a roll of film because I didn't expose it correctly, or I didn't have the settings right, or, I didn't get the light seals fixed, whatever. And my desire for exposing an image perfectly and not having any, anomalies in it and all that stuff makes me seek out information. Okay, well, let me watch a video on this camera, how to expose properly and use the light meter. Let me find all the tricks, and everybody get the shortcut to the information because someone else learned the hard way, whatever. Where I just had a bunch of rolls come back and I forgot to set the ISO dial. I had 50 speed film and I had it at 250. I didn't read the light meter in the Canon F1 correctly because I had a non-Canon lens. Then I put a Canon lens on, and it works differently if you have a Canon lens versus a non-Canon lens. And I jacked up like 3 rolls of film, underexposed by 2 to 4 stops. And a couple of them, I was like, this is a photo that might be an all-timer in my short career as a photographer. Like, I had this one photo, I almost spent time on this, but it was like midday, super contrasty, this yellow house, not like bright yellow, like mustard yellow. And there was like a shadow on the awning. And then there was a front door and a big green bush. There's a little boy in the window and a dog sitting on the porch. And the boy looked at me, click. And now it's underexposed by like 4 stops.
It lives in perfection in your head, though.
And now I haven't tried to see like what can I turn those photos into. Maybe there's something interesting there. Maybe there's a look. Maybe there's a vibe. Maybe there's something there that will be interesting. And I think that's the excitement about artists. When they can't Google it, when they can't watch a YouTube video, when they have to screw around with the software or the instrument or whatever, when they aren't listening to, well, I want to make a folk, album, singer-songwriter stuff, and they're going to go through Bob Dylan, and they're going to go through all the greats, and then that permeates their mind, and they start emulating it or whatever. Like, if you can get into a place where you're stumbling through it, something special might come of it. Like you mentioned art, right? Well, the Impressionist movement in France, potentially, and I don't know enough about it, but like, well, I don't want to paint it the way that we're taught in school. I don't want everything to be perfect and the lighting and the still lives and all that stuff. I want it to be dreamy and vibey and whatever. And I'm going to reject what you're telling me, and I'm going to go this route. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is I'm going to reject the current atmosphere of technology. And even if I'm still using technology through retro technology or 35 millimeter film or old DV tape camcorders or this or that, like I want to reject all this stuff and try to do something new over here and figure out something that feels like it has the elements, and I mean elements like mercury and oxygen and all that, has the elements of these other things, but it's a new molecule.
I think there's an interesting thing you talked about. It like it's having been a while since something major shifted.
Yeah.
And I think historically we've always rejected the previous generation.
Yeah.
Right? You go to the previous generation, what they've done up to the point that you come in. Mm-hmm. I don't want to do it that way. I want to do it this way. So everything is incremental, building on itself.
Yeah.
Previous generation, new generation rejects new.
Yep.
Next generation rejects that new,
right?
Even newer.
Yep.
Next generation rejects that, even newer. And that's in part because there's always been a limited access to information of the previous.
Yeah.
Now we are rejecting history.
Right. Yeah.
Everything's
Truth.
available.
Yeah.
Everything in the ever is available to us as
Right.
influence. And so we're rejecting everything, and we're figuring out what needs. So in my head, it would make a little bit of sense that it's been longer, because it takes a little longer to it takes less time to reject the previous generation
Right.
than to reject history.
Yeah.
And the internet gives us the ability in a way to reject history. And so we're synthesizing still. We're figuring out what that looks like. What does the next iteration look like? And
Well,
you're getting, you get memes, and you get, all of this is just punching and trying to figure out what comes next.
And is it harder for us to, will it be harder for us to see a movement, a counterculture, a new
Maybe,
jazz,
maybe that doesn't
barbecue, Art Nouveau? Is it going to be hard to for all of us to see
there
it?
are no more
because
all-encompassing.
There's a gazillion media outlets.
Yeah.
There's YouTube. There's social media apps. There's so many ways to get it out there. I mean, I think no matter what, when something captures
cultural waves are cultural waves. Like those are always going to exist,
and it's gonna. It's going to ascend through, the top, but the sort of the media with the largest audience to the smallest pockets.
Commerce,
but then
turned into commerce, and you're gonna
right. But that other video that I shared with you, the people searching for cool, that old video,
cool.
And the people that are seeking out those artistic and cultural movements so that they can appropriate them for a Sprite commercial.
Yeah. And I mean, part of that is, we're gonna have to come to terms with that, because it's funny. If you would have asked me 5 years ago about commercialism, I would have thought, because I was this is a little bit naive of me, but I limited scope comparing it to like the grunge and anti-commercialism of like the early and late 90s. And like commercialism was absolutely rampant in the 90s and things like that. But it evolved. It became more disguised. And if you would have asked me 5 years ago, I would have probably come with the mindset of like, commercialism is just a part of culture now.
Absolutely.
And I don't disagree with that, but I do think there is a rift forming. And there's a crack in the
because commercialism has been democratized. I'm commercial. I'm trying to sell you a course. I'm trying to sell you my plugins. I'm trying to sell you this.
And what have you seen? You
everywhere.
democratize commercialism in these little micro communities like YouTube. And then what have you've seen burnout. You've seen the result of that culture.
Yes.
So like, you're seeing microcosms of what happened with like these major celebrities where they just burned out or killed themselves or whatever.
Yeah.
That was a little bit, I just threw that out there, but like, you are seeing microcosms of that. And I think we're becoming, you talk about media literate, we're becoming more literate of what these things are. And so you are going to you're starting to see more of a rejection of that stuff. And I think this rejection of it is even stronger than the grunge movement and things like that, because that was more of a superficial rejection.
Yeah.
While this is like a from the inside out
rejection. Well, and we have so many ways to listen to people talking about their frustration. We have YouTube, we have all the traditional social media, but we also have podcasts. I mean, I'm just listening to Chris Pine on Tetragrammaton. I was listening to a couple of vloggers on YouTube that have like sub 5,000 subscribers.
I mean,
they're making like this one young woman, her vlogs are to me phenomenal. It's like that beautiful blend of art and content that I think YouTube is really strong with. And it, like I feel like it's out there. We're talking about it. People are talking about. There's this.
And part of that might just be
this
like
growing frustration.
Like it's being presented to us because that's
potentially,
what we're seeking out. That's potential. But I mean, I referenced two things that have captured the entire U.S. Before this,
right
in our pre-show, that do make me think this is a little more than just, yes, it is in our niche. It's being served to us. And maybe we have a better grasp on it because we're approaching it from a different, but it is starting to make its way into, whether people recognize it or not.
Yeah.
It's starting to crash into
the
general populace. Maybe, hopefully.
Well, and with COVID and all that stuff, I mean, I think all of it, a desire to connect to nature, a desire to connect with each other,
Right.
more tangible, real world, physical experiences, building communities that are not about attract and extract. It's not about a newsletter. It's not about buy my stuff. It's not about.
Can you define attract? Because you
Yeah.
told me what it meant to you beforehand, and I don't think we've, because I love that concept.
Yeah, I may have wrote it in my notebook, and I'll maybe if I find where it first popped or first came to me, it didn't come to me as in I came up with that phrase, but I consumed it on something, watching a video or whatever it was, and it was again kind of like the Technopoly book. Someone just says 3 words, and it gives me a clearer understanding of what this thing I'm seeing and feeling is. I'm like, that's what it is, attract and extract. And we've talked about this on I struggle with like coming up with a newsletter, making a Final Cut Pro course, like all this stuff that feels like, well, you attracted this audience. Now it's time to extract. You want to earn a living from this. But then you also just want to make cool videos that happen to earn you a living versus you like consciously and deliberately making things that get views, get subscribers, get sponsorships, all that stuff. In a perfect world for me, I would just make whatever videos I feel like making, and the byproduct of that would be, revenue that was like, cool, this is great. I feel like a Casey Neistat. Like I feel like he is the example of someone who he didn't even have his ad revenue stuff turned on for a long time. He was just purely making things that he wanted to make. And then he turned on the ad revenue and it's like, oh, now all of a sudden I'm good. And there's conversations to be had about what the fallout is of that financial stability and that, and the wealth that he has and how that informs what he makes and doesn't make. But attract and extract, the rejection that I have is when someone is like, I see a hole in the market. If I become a photography channel that talks about this and does these things in the playbook, but then also fills in this missing gap, I can attract a large audience. And the commercialist in me will lie in wait. And when I hit a certain amount of subscribers, then I'll start rolling out the extraction. And it might be a newsletter. It might be a course. It might be a free thing that, but you got to give me your email address so I can, market to you. It might be sponsored ads. It might be affiliate revenue, et cetera, et cetera. And then, someone like me who isn't calculated in that way, but definitely has turned on, push the button. I want affiliate revenue. I want sponsorships. I want these things. You start getting into this feeling where it's like, well, hey, audience, if you want more videos from me, I need to extract more from you. Become a channel member. Watch my videos all the way through so that the sponsors see that I get a lot of attention. And to me, there's a really gross element of attract and extract, a very conscious entrepreneurial pursuit that is trying to mask itself in authenticity. There are the people that are like, this is a business. I'm literally opening a store and I'm going to attract people, but it's a business from day one. Like I'm selling stuff day one. I may only have 5 people that are watching me or whatever, but my intention from day one is to make money, and provide value, but I'm going to make money. And then someone like me, that's more like, well, I want to make work and I kind of want to express myself and I want to do this and then do that. I also need to earn a living, and I'm going to stop doing these curtain earning a living, client work, having a job, all that stuff. And I'm going to start shedding all of that and then put more pressure on the art/content stuff to earn revenue. That then I get into this place where I'm feeling real conflict. I've attracted this audience and I have the ability to extract from them in ways that I could probably earn a good living doing it. But there's parts of that feel gross to me, or I haven't mapped it well enough to understand the way that I can do it that makes me feel like I'm not attracting and extracting in the more deliberate, shallow way.
It's almost like you have to, if you probably would not feel guilty about extracting if you felt that you were delivering something that was of true value.
Yeah.
But then getting into that, like, it gets into the definition of what is value.
Right.
What, why is what you're doing valuable? What is that? Does that take a certain type of ego to think that that's valuable? Are you searching for value through metrics of,
Right.
oh, there's a hole for, like you said, there's a hole in the market for this.
Yep.
Yeah. I almost wonder if there's, like a,
Pressfield had something that in The War of Art that
great little quick read. Yeah.
I've been going through, and
we need to wrap up here.
I know. I probably won't find it, but it was...
No pressure.
Yeah. Well, whenever
Can you share your highlighting process? Because
I mean, for this
look
one,
at that, just a little note.
Purple highlighter, and then just a little note with a felt tip marker.
I wish I could write notes in books.
You just have like it just pains you to do it.
Yeah, it just hurts me.
I think there's some books that I would not do it for.
I need to embrace messiness more.
Here we go. This is the
right.
one. Because this book is really making me, and we could do this in another video, but this book is really making me try to evaluate that attract and extract mentality, because there is
Let's
part
do a
of me,
video on just because
and this could be a little teaser for
Yeah.
that, but he wrote, this is in a section called Resistance and Self-Doubt. Self-doubt can be an ally. This is because it serves as an indicator of aspiration. It reflects love of something we dream of doing, and desire to do it. If you find yourself asking yourself and your friends, am I really a writer? Am I really an artist? Chances are you are. The counterfeit innovator is wildly self-confident. The real one is scared to death. And so I wrote down, am I counterfeit? Because just talking about what I said before, the baseball writer mentality, like feel it, process it, make it, send it. Feel it, process it, make it, send it. But then that attract and extract element of hoping to earn a living, making things that I want to make every day, not being employed by someone else, not doing client work, not doing anything that isn't, I want to make this thing today because I feel like it. And the concerns I have that there is something in me, like you were saying, ego, attention. We've talked about this throughout, like when I got attacked by that guy, well, maybe I should post about this on Instagram right away, and this podcast, just to wrap up, has been so helpful in not only mapping what I'm seeing happening out there, but what is going on with me, what I've done, my history, and then, what I'm doing on a daily basis. And, these books are conversations, and get me going. There's something in me with ego and attention and the desire for not just financial security, but like financial prosperity without being, like a billionaire, something like ridiculous. And that force in me. And then I think just a selfless desire to make work, to respond to something, whether it's through pain or frustration or just observing a beautiful moment on the street and taking a photograph of it, or making something deliberately as a reaction to an article like The Age of Average, and not thinking at all in terms of how can I monetize this? How do I get this in a gallery? How do I get this in front of an audience? How do I submit this to a contest? How do I get attention from this thing? Because if I get attention and validation and all of that stuff, then I'm gonna, when I walk into the coffee shop, people are going to know who I am. Mm-hmm. And that's important to me. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying for that part of my brain.
Right.
Is it? And that's all part of what's swirling inside of me.
I think it's just something, though, that has to be, some people are blessed where they, they just are of a certain, they're almost predisposed to not have that.
Yeah.
That sense of it's difficult especially for people, like you said, like 21st century, I'd wager there's probably a lot of younger people out there who, like, all they know is the metric of like fame and celebrity, or, you know, financial security, but also just, you know, indulgence.
Right.
And yeah, I think it's a process. Everybody, you know, if that's all your exposure, then there is almost a relearning that has to take place. And I think that it's probably a constant.
Yeah. Well, I think these elements are swirling inside all of us that are doing what we do to varying degrees.
And they always have been too. Like, they're not; these aren't new feelings. You know,
I
might be.
Listened to a podcast with Casey Neistat, and he's just flat out said, like, oh yeah, I mean, I pursued everything with filmmaking and all that because I wanted to be a millionaire.
Yeah.
You know, was that the only thing he wanted? No, but he's like, I literally grew up broke. Like, he went down like gas money and welfare and all this stuff, having a kid at 15, all that stuff. And he's like, I 100% wanted the money.
You know, thing, like, the medium is the message, where it's like you should look for the medium, see what the medium's trying to tell you. Like, the medium will tell you more than the actual message that's being given.
Yeah.
And it's like the medium of YouTube in a lot of ways kind of speaks to, I want to be a millionaire.
Right.
More so than like, I want to, I don't know if this is always going to be true, but definitely in, like, especially in like the early 2010s, 2014 through 2018, maybe like the mecca of like that.
Yeah.
YouTube 2.0 or whatever.
Yeah.
The medium being the message, like, you know, he was making vlogs on YouTube.
Yeah.
And like, there was an artistic quality to him, but yeah, it kind of spoke to that idea of like, I care about filmmaking, but I care about the, you know, a lot of people watching these videos and things like that. I'm not trying to, you know.
And he talks about that,
I'm
looking
fan,
at YouTube Studios, seeing the views, seeing, you know, all that.
Yeah.
Like, it gets to all of us.
The medium kind of speaks to that.
Artists release a movie and check the box office. I mean, Coppola cared about the box office of The Godfather that weekend. Like, it was important to him. And maybe, again, the hierarchy of intentions, part of it was, well, what kind of bonus am I going to get? Yeah. The other part is like, are people responding to this? Maybe
it was also,
are people connecting with this?
Everybody doubted me this whole time.
That too, yeah.
And he got to
validation.
Kind of be like
validation. Yeah,
exactly. So, and I mean, we all want validation, right? Everybody puts work. Anytime we put work out in the world, we want validation.
Absolutely.
It might not be the direct want, but
the top. Yeah, the
it
top
feels
want.
good no matter what. Like, if somebody comes to you and says, "I really like this," even if it's just reassurance that, you know, okay, I'm not alone.
Yep.
You know, I'm not alone. Somebody else has a similar feeling.
Yeah.
But anyways, I think that's probably the point to it.
A little bit of a
hour and 22.
Yeah, we're starting to get on that hour 25 mark.
All right, good podcast.
It had been a golden afternoon, and I remember having the familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer.